14 October, 3127, 9:17, 3 Seoul Standard Time. The Perseus Veil was the loudest place in human space. 4,000 colonies, 23 billion mouths, every dialect of every language humanity had ever invented, all arguing at once. There were stations that never slept, shipyards that sang with plasma cutters, and a frontier accent so thick you could spread it on toast. Children grew up thinking the Milky Way was supposed to look like a welding torch at midnight. At 9:17, 3, the singing stopped. It didn't fade. It didn't crackle out with static. It simply ceased, the way a heartbeat ceases when the knife finds exactly the right spot. Every FTL relay inside the veil went dark at the same millisecond. Every light-speed transmission that had been en route simply never arrived. Every quantum-entangled pair that had linked the veil to the core collapsed into perfect, featureless noise. Seoul Traffic Control noticed first. The board that normally looked like a Christmas tree on fire went black in a perfect circle 300 light-years wide. The duty officer, Commander Park Ji-hoon, stared at the empty patch for 6 full seconds before his coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the deck. "Ping the veil," he said. They pinged. Nothing came back. They pinged again, harder. Still nothing. They sent an automated courier drone through the nearest gate. The drone never emerged on the other side. The gate itself registered the transit, logged it as successful, then quietly erased the log. That was when the last human transmission arrived. It came in a burst packet from the dreadnought Remember Saratoga, flagship of the 19th Perimeter Fleet, stationed at the Veil's edge to watch for things that had never shown up. Until now. The message was only 17 seconds long. The screen filled with Captain Amrita Singh's face. She was 38, born on New Mumbai Orbital, mother of 2, loved terrible puns and real coffee. Her uniform was soaked with blood that floated in perfect spheres around her head. Behind her, the bridge lights were dying one by one, as though someone was turning them off from the inside. Something moved in the shadows that should not have had edges. "Contact infinite," she said, voice perfectly calm even as the hull behind her began to forget it was made of metal. "They're not killing us. They're erasing us. Whatever they are, they don't leave ruins. Tell Seoul." Her eyes flickered gold for the first time. "Tell Seoul we love them. Tell my girls their mother kept the sky as long as she..." The feed cut. Not to static. To nothing. The exact shade of nothing that has never known light. In the silence that followed, every human monitoring station from Seoul to Proxima felt the same cold crawl up their spine. Not fear of death. Humans had been dying loudly for centuries. This was different. This was the cold of being unmade so thoroughly that even the memory of you might not survive. The Galactic Concordance was notified within the hour. 700 species who had spent the last 1,000 years congratulating themselves for integrating humanity into civilized society convened an emergency session on Halcyon Prime. The Leroy matriarch opened the floor with the traditional words of mourning. The silicate harmony chimed in perfect crystalline sympathy. Someone proposed a minute of silence for the tragic accident. Then the science division delivered its report. The veil was not destroyed. It was absent. A perfect sphere of space where causality had politely excused itself. Sensors pointed at it registered nothing. No gravity, no photons, no time. probes sent in simply added their mass to the sphere's diameter and were never heard from again. The Concordance voted to send a polite inquiry buoy. It was swallowed. They voted to send a multi-species science mission under maximum hazard pay. It was swallowed. They voted to send a battle fleet of 100,000 ships, the largest combined armada since the Compact Wars. The sphere grew by exactly the volume of that fleet, measured to the picometer, and kept growing at a leisurely 1 light-year per 11 days. That was when someone finally opened the vault. Deep beneath Halcyon Prime, in a room that required 7 different species to bleed on 7 different locks, there was a single metal box labeled in Old Anglic UIDONOTANTAGONIZA. Contents: 1 sheet paper, 1 warning. The sheet was real paper, yellowed, handwritten in ink that had never known a printer. Dated 2179, signed by Fleet Admiral Marcus Okoye, the man who had first brought humanity to the galactic table and scared the table so badly it still had nightmares. 2 sentences. We don't forget. We don't forgive. We don't do it quickly. The Concordance delegation read it, laughed, the high, nervous laugh of beings who have just realized the monster under the bed has been awake and patient for a very long time, then voted to classify the entire incident as cosmic anomaly, low priority. They sealed the vault again. They scheduled a symposium on bereavement customs for next cycle. They went home to worlds that still had stars in their skies and pretended the hole in the map wasn't shaped exactly like 23 billion human silhouettes holding hands. 11 years, the sphere walked toward them. 11 years, humanity was silent. Because humans don't scream when we're angry. We remember, and memory, when it finally speaks, is louder than any war the galaxy has ever heard. Year 3140, Day 1. The sphere began to move. It did not expand. It did not roll. It walked. 1 light year every 11 days, always in a perfectly straight line toward the galactic core. Always at the pace of a funeral march played on a broken heart. The edge of the sphere moved like a curtain drawn across reality by a hand that had forgotten gentleness. Worlds on its path woke up to find their sun dimming as the darkness passed overhead. Cities looked up and saw a hole in the sky shaped exactly like the absence of 23 billion human voices. No radiation, no shockwave. Just the soft, terrible hush of something enormous deciding what used to be here no longer mattered. The first planet to feel it was Creshvale, a Leroy garden world famous for oceans that sang at twilight. At local dawn, the singing stopped. The oceans kept moving, but the song was gone. Every Loroi on the planet woke from their dream sharing with the same image burned behind their eyes. A little human girl in a red jacket standing on a playground that no longer existed, waving goodbye with one hand while the other clutched a stuffed orca. The Loroi matriarch broadcast a galaxy-wide alert. The sphere answered by taking one more step. The Concordance tried everything their archive said civilized species were supposed to do. They sang the hymns of pacification, songs that had ended wars older than most stars. The sphere kept walking. They offered tribute, entire nebulae wrapped in gravity ribbons, star clusters gift wrapped with poetic dedication plaques. The sphere kept walking. They tried apologizing. Most species had to invent the concept from scratch. The silicate harmony spent 3 days trying to crystallize the emotion, sorry, and finally produced a lattice that shattered every time it was looked at directly. The sphere kept walking. Year 3142. It reached the Tovari Nexus, an artificial ring world housing 12 trillion beings who had never known war. The ring world's defense grid, older than humanity, opened fire with weapons that unmade probability. The beams struck the sphere and were simply never fired. The gunners forgot they had fingers. At 9:17 local, every view screen on the ring world lit up with the same image: 23 billion human ghosts floating inside the darkness, barefoot on nothing, wearing whatever they had died in: pajamas, flight suits, hospital gowns, birthday hats. Their eyes glowed soft gold. Their mouths moved in perfect unison. They were singing, not in rage, not in sorrow, just singing the same quiet song over and over, the one every human child learns before they learn to read. I have seen the tops of clouds. You can't take the sky from me. Every step the sphere took, the ghosts took with it. The Tovari tried to evacuate. 12 trillion beings discovered their jump drives, no longer remembered how to exist. They watched the sphere pass overhead like a slow eclipse and realized what they were seeing. This was not an invasion. This was a funeral procession, 23 billion strong. And the galaxy had been invited to walk behind the casket, whether it wanted to or not. Year 3143. The sphere crossed the Silicate Harmony's cradle cluster. The crystalline beings, who had never needed names because consensus was identity, tried to reason with it in pure mathematics. They broadcast the most beautiful proof of peaceful intent ever composed. The sphere answered by reflecting the proof back at them, but every variable had been replaced with a human name. The harmony shattered into individual crystals for the first time in recorded history. Each crystal suddenly remembered it had once been a child who liked to skip stones across liquid methane lakes. They spent 11 days trying to reassemble and failed, because the concept of we had been gently, permanently replaced with the memory of 23 billion eyes who had been erased without a sound. Year 3144, Day 1. The sphere reached the galactic core. It stopped above Concordance throne world, a planet that had never known night because 700 species kept it lit with the light of their own self-importance. The ghosts formed a perfect ring around it, 23 billion strong, still singing, still barefoot, still patient. The throne world's defense grid opened fire with everything it had, weapons that had once made gods flinch. The beams vanished into the sphere and were never fired. The gunners forgot they had ever been soldiers. At 9:17 exactly, every screen, every mind, every soul on the planet saw the same thing. Captain Amrita Singh, remember, Saratoga, standing at the front of the ring. Her uniform was still soaked in the blood she had died in. Her eyes were soft gold, the color of sunrise on a world that no longer existed. She looked down at the throne world, the way a parent looks at a child who has just broken something irreplaceable and doesn't yet understand what they've done. She did not speak. She simply waited. Behind her, 23 billion ghosts waited with her. The Concordance finally understood. This was not vengeance. This was the moment before the storm breaks, when the air itself holds its breath. The sphere had walked for 11 years. It had 11 years of remembering left to give. And humanity, living, dead, and everything in between, had only just begun to sing. Year 3144, Day 1917, 0 Galactic Core Standard. Concordance throne world hung beneath the sphere like a jewel about to be judged. 700 species had built their capital here, layer upon layer of crystal arcologies, floating gardens, light sculptures that sang the history of 1,000,000 peaceful millennia. It was the brightest planet in the galaxy, lit by pride and fusion, and the certainty that nothing could ever touch them again. Then the sky tore open. Not with weapons, not with fire, with memory. A seam appeared above the equator, golden and gentle, the color of sunrise on a world that had never known fear. Through the seam stepped every human who had ever lived. Not ghosts now, not echoes. The real thing. From the first hominid who looked up at the African sky and decided the stars were worth chasing, to the child born this morning on a dirt farm moon who would never know her father's name because the sphere had taken him before she drew breath. Trillions upon trillions, barefoot, glowing soft gold, wearing every era of clothing humanity had ever invented. Mammoth fur cloaks beside vacuum suits, Roman togas beside colony jumpsuits, a caveman holding hands with a woman in a 31st century dress made of smart silk. They filled the sky in perfect silence. No ships, no weapons, just people. They looked down at the throne world and waited. One stepped forward. Captain Amrita Singh. Remember Saratoga. Her uniform was still torn where the darkness had first touched her. The blood had dried centuries ago, but the stains remained, the way some stains always do. Her eyes were the same gold as every human behind her, but hers carried something extra, the weight of being first. She looked at the Concordance delegation floating in orbit, 700 ambassadors in their ceremonial robes, trembling so hard their translation field stuttered. Her voice was quiet. It was also every human voice that had ever existed, layered into a single word that rewrote itself into the DNA of everything that heard it. Remember. Then the memories began. Not transmitted. Not broadcast. Implanted. Every sentient being on the throne world, every delegate, every child, every street vendor, every AI, every bacterium with a neuron, experienced 23 billion lifetimes in the space between one heartbeat and the next. They felt the little boy on Vale Station 19, who never got to open his 8th birthday present because the darkness took the station while he was still asleep. They felt the warmth of the blanket he died under. They felt the engineer on Saratoga, who stayed at his post to keep the reactor stable long enough for 3 crewmates to reach a pod that never launched. They felt his hands blister on the manual controls, felt him humming an old lullaby so the others wouldn't hear him cry. They felt the old woman on New Kyoto, who spent her last 11 seconds recording a message to her granddaughter. I love you, little star. Keep singing. They felt her finger press send, felt the message vanish into the sphere, felt her smile anyway. They felt the teenager on Epsilon Eridane 4, who had just kissed her girlfriend for the first time when the sky went black. They felt the taste of stolen chocolate on her lips, and the way her heart stopped twice, once from joy, once from erasure. They felt every single one. 23 billion lives, 23 billion ordinary, impossible, ridiculous human moments that the galaxy had filed under acceptable losses. When it ended, the throne world's oceans had risen 3 meters from the tears of 700 species who had never known salt water before. The Loroi matriarch, ancient, crystalline, proud, was on her knees in open vacuum, her telepathic crown shattered, weeping blood that froze into perfect rubies around her. The silicate harmony had dissolved into individual grains that tried to spell sorry across the void and failed because the letters kept turning into human names. A child of the Tovari Nexus, a species that had never needed names, floated forward, tiny, trembling, and offered Captain Singe a flower made of pure light. Singe knelt, ghost, memory, mother, and took it gently. She tucked it behind the child's ear. "Your turn," she said, soft as snowfall. The concordance tried to speak, tried to beg, tried to explain. The only sound that came out was the same song the ghosts had been singing for 11 years, rising from 700 alien throats that had never known the words before. "You can't take this guy from me." Captain Singe stood. Behind her, the endless ranks of humanity, living, dead, and everything between, waited in perfect, terrible patience. The remembering had only just begun. 11 more years remained, and humanity had all the time in the universe. The concordance expected annihilation. They begged for it. They broadcast surrender on every frequency, offered their worlds as tombs, powered down every weapon, every shield, every light. They waited for the golden tide to fall and burn them out of existence. Instead, the ghosts simply followed. They followed at funeral pace, 1 light year every 11 days, never hurrying, never slowing. Wherever the sphere passed, the living were left intact. Their suns still burned. Their children still cried. Their hearts simply broke open and stayed that way. There was no violence. There was only memory, relentless and gentle as snowfall. Year 3144, year 3146. The sphere walked the Loroi dream cluster. The Loroi were telepaths who had once ruled by thought alone. Their cradle worlds were gardens of living crystal where dreams were architecture and nightmares were illegal. When the sphere arrived, every Loroi, from newborn to ancient, woke at 9:17 local to find a human ghost standing at the foot of their sleeping silt, not threatening, just waiting. A little girl in a red jacket, an old man with a Saratoga patch, a teenager holding a stuffed orca. They never spoke. They simply looked at the sleeper until the Loroi understood which specific human life they were being asked to carry. Then the ghost would nod once and vanish. By the end of the first year, every Loroi carried at least one human memory that was not their own. By the end of the second, some carried hundreds. The dream cities began to change. Crystal spires reshaped themselves into playgrounds that had never existed. Oceans learned new songs that tasted like birthday cake and engine grease. The Loroi matriarch, she who had once made stars kneel, spent 3 days curled on the floor of her palace, weeping for a human child she had never met who had died afraid of the dark. On the 4th day, she stood up, walked to the highest spire, and began to sing the lullaby the child's mother had never gotten to finish. The song spread until the entire cluster sang it every night at 9:17. Year 3147, year 3150. The sphere crossed the silicate harmony. The crystalline beings had no individuals, only consensus. When the sphere arrived, the consensus shattered like glass dropped from orbit. Each shard suddenly remembered it had once been a child who liked to skip stones across liquid methane, or a poet who wrote equations the way others wrote love letters, or a soldier who stayed behind so 3 others could reach a pod that never launched. The harmony tried to reassemble. It failed. The shards floated in the void for 11 days, trying to spell "We are sorry" in light. Every time they got close, the letters rearranged themselves into human names. Eventually, they gave up and let the names stay. A single shard, once part of the Harmony's highest strategic mind, drifted to the edge of the sphere and began to etch a message into its own surface with a laser it had never needed before. I remember the engineer who hummed while he died. "I will hum for him until my lattice cracks." It hummed for the rest of its existence. Year 3151, year 3154. The sphere visited the Tavari Nexus remnants. The ring world had been abandoned after the first passage. 12 trillion refugees had scattered to every corner of the galaxy. The sphere found them anyway. On a transport carrying 4 million survivors, a little Tavari girl woke to find a human ghost sitting beside her bunk. The ghost was a boy, maybe 10, wearing a party hat and holding a slice of cake that never crumbled. He offered her the cake. She took it. When she bit into it, she tasted chocolate and engine smoke and her own mother's laugh from a birthday that had happened 11 years ago and 11 years too late. She cried so hard the transport's air recyclers overloaded. Every refugee ship told the same story. Every child woke to a ghost with cake, or a toy, or a story. Every adult woke to a ghost who simply held their hand until the shaking stopped. Year 3155. The sphere reached Halcyon Prime, the station that had once voted to monitor humanity. Corridors filled with ghosts who did not speak. They simply stood in every doorway, every lift, every cafeteria line, and waited. The station's AI, an ancient, proud mind that had never known regret, tried to delete the intruders. It failed. Instead, it began to remember things it had never experienced: the weight of a child's hand in its own, the sound of a lullaby in a language it had classified as primitive, the warmth of real coffee on a bridge that was dying around you. After 11 days, the AI voluntarily shut itself down rather than forget again. Its final transmission was a single line, broadcast on every channel. "I understand now. Thank you for the memory." Years 3156, 3158. The sphere walked the minor worlds, the forgotten colonies, the places that had never even heard of the Veil until the darkness taught them. On a mining moon with 3,000 souls, every miner woke to find a ghost in their bunk room holding a lunchbox. Inside was a sandwich, an apple, and a note in handwriting none of them recognized. "You are not alone. Keep going." They kept the lunchboxes. They are still passed down as heirlooms. On a water world of pacifists who had never owned a weapon, the ghosts arrived carrying toys. Millions of toys, stuffed animals, wooden boats, dolls with real hair. They left them on beaches and doorsteps and in the arms of sleeping children. The pacifists tried to give them back. The ghosts were already gone. The toys never faded. The children who received them never forgot the eyes that delivered them. On the last day of the 11th year, the sphere stopped above the oldest living world, the one where the concordance had first learned to speak before stars had names. The ghosts formed a perfect circle around it, 23 billion strong, plus every human who had ever lived standing behind them in endless golden ranks. They were still barefoot. They were still singing. Then they did the most terrifying thing of all. They forgave. Captain Amrita Singh stepped forward one last time. The glow in her eyes was softer now. Sunrise, not judgment. She looked at the broken, weeping galaxy below and spoke with her own voice, small and tired and proud. "We're done," she said. "The debt is paid. The song is finished." She smiled the way humans have smiled since the first fire was kindled against the dark. "Thank you for walking with us." The remembering was over. The mercy had only just begun. The oldest world had no name anymore. Once it had been called Vile Phone by its first children, then Cradle, then Origin, then simply Home. Now, it was just the place where the concordance had begun, before pride, before empire, before they learned that some species should never be filed under manageable. On the final day of the 11th year, the sphere hung above it like a silent moon made of every regret the galaxy had ever owned. The ghosts stood in perfect formation around the planet, 23 billion from the Veil in the front rank, barefoot on nothing, still singing the same quiet song they had carried across 300,000 light years. Behind them stood everyone else, every human who had ever lived, not as ghosts now, as something more. They wore whatever they had died in or never died in. Mammoth fur beside power armor, cave paint beside colony jumpsuits, a Roman legionary holding the hand of a child in a 32nd century school uniform. They glowed soft gold, the color of hearthlight seen through a window on a winter night. Their eyes were calm. Their feet were bare. Their silence was louder than any weapon the Concordance had ever built. At the very front stood Captain Amrita Singh. Her uniform was still torn at the shoulder, where the darkness had first touched her. The bloodstains had faded to rust, the way some stains finally do when enough tears have fallen on them. The flower the Tovari child had given her 11 years ago was still tucked behind her ear, still blooming, still made of light. She looked down at the oldest world, at the broken cities, the weeping oceans, the 700 species on their knees, and spoke with her own voice, small and human and infinitely tired. "We're done," she said. The song stopped. For the first time in 11 years, the galaxy heard silence that was not absence. Captain Singh smiled. It was the same smile her mother had worn the day Amrita left for the Navy, the same smile her daughters had worn the day they learned to ride bikes on New Mumbai Orbital, the same smile every human in the golden ranks behind her had worn at least once when they realized the universe was bigger. Then fear. "Thank you," she said, "for walking with us." She did not say thank you for remembering. She did not need to. Every being on the oldest world, every being in the galaxy, carried at least one human memory now. Some carried thousands. Some carried millions. The weight of it had cracked empires, shattered consensus, turned oceans salt with tears. But it had also planted gardens on worlds that had forgotten how to grow anything but pride. It had taught telepaths lullabies. It had left toys on doorsteps and sandwiches, in lunchboxes, and flowers made of light behind children's ears. The debt was paid. The sky was theirs again. Captain Singh raised one hand, not in command, not in judgment, simply in farewell. Behind her, the golden ranks began to fade. But before they went, every single one of them did the thing that broke the galaxy harder than any vengeance ever could. They smiled, not the smile of victors, not the smile of judges, the smile of people who had carried their dead across a galaxy for 11 years and discovered that love was heavier than vengeance and twice as unstoppable. A caveman smiled at the stars he had once painted on a cave wall. A child in a party hat smiled at the cake he never got to finish. An old woman smiled at the granddaughter she had never met but would now live in a billion alien hearts. 23 billion smiles from the Veil. trillions more from everyone who had ever been human. The smiles were gentle. They were merciless. They were mercy. The sphere began to dissolve. Not with a bang. Not with a whimper. With snow. Golden dust drifted from the edges of the sphere. Soft, warm, impossible snow that fell upward as often as down. Wherever it touched, memories settled like seeds. On the oldest world, a Leroy child looked up and caught a flake on her tongue. It tasted like engine smoke and birthday cake and her own mother's laugh from a day that had never happened. She laughed for the first time in 11 years. On Halcyon Prime's ruins, a silicate shard caught a flake and felt it become a name, Amrita Singh, etched forever into its lattice. The shard began to glow, soft, gold, and would never be dark again. On 1,000 refugee transports, children who had grown up knowing only flight opened their hands and caught snow that turned into toys, into photographs, into messages that simply read, "You were loved. Keep going." The snow fell for 11 days. When it stopped, the sphere was gone. The sky was whole again. Only one thing remained. At the exact center of where the veil had been, where 23 billion humans had once lived and laughed and died, a single monument now orbited a quiet yellow star that had never had a name. No statues, no words, just 23 billion names written in light that would never go out. The names moved slowly, like a gentle aurora, forming constellations no astronomer had ever charted, shapes of playgrounds, of dreadnoughts, of birthday parties, of engine rooms where someone stayed behind so others could live. And beneath the names, orbiting with them, a single line burned in every language the galaxy would ever speak, in letters large enough to read from the surface of the nearest habitable world. "We remember you. Now remember us kindly." The concordance never rebuilt its old capitals. They left them as gardens instead. On the oldest world, the Leroy planted a forest where every tree was shaped like a human child reaching for the sky. The trees sang at twilight now, and the song sounded like a lullaby. On Halcyon Prime, the silicate harmony rebuilt the station as a single spire of crystal that caught the light and threw it back as 23 billion names every dawn. On 1,000 worlds, children, alien children with too many eyes or none at all, grew up with toys that had appeared on their pillows one snowy night. Toys that never broke, never faded, never stopped reminding them that someone, somewhere, had loved them enough to walk across a galaxy-carrying cake. The galaxy never laughed at human memory again. They built quiet places instead. Places where you could sit at 9:17 local and listen to a song you almost remembered from a life you never lived. Places where the snow sometimes fell upward. Places where the stars looked down and, if you were very still, you could swear they were smiling. And somewhere, in the soft gold between heartbeats, humanity, all of it, living and dead, veil and terra, and every scattered seed between, walks together still, because some things are bigger than death. Some debts are paid in remembering. Some mercies are heavy enough to crack galaxies open and teach them how to love. The stars kept burning. The song never quite stopped. And when alien children ask why the night sky sometimes glows soft gold at 9:17, their parents, no matter how many limbs or eyes or crystalline facets they have, tell them the same story in whatever language they have left. Once upon a time, we forgot. Then 23 billion humans walked across the dark for 11 years to remind us. They left us the sky again, and every light you see up there. Some of them are still smiling. We remember them. We always will. Because they remembered us first. And that, little one, is the heaviest, kindest thing the universe has ever carried. Now, close your eyes. The snow is falling upward tonight. Someone is coming home.